Welcome to the Your Life, Your Brand podcast with myself, James Oliver. Please hit the follow or subscribe button. It would mean the absolute world to me. On this episode, I am joined by Indy Gregg, the founder and CEO of Wedo, a new app that simplifies work for freelancers, gig workers, and small business owners. She has 20 plus years in the tech industry, and this is her fifth startup. Throughout her time in the tech industry, she has also balanced her time as a mum of three. Before her career in tech, she has also had a successful music career. So let's dive right in. Indy, I know you're super busy, so thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I would really like to rewind all the way back to the start. How did it all begin for you?
I was born in the Midwest United States, and kind of a not poor family, but very modest family. Some evenings we had watermelon, and we lived in the cornfields in the Midwest. And but I had a really strong kind of upbringing. My parents had a really strong philosophy. You work hard, you try to find things that you love to do and enjoy life, but you work really hard and you make your way in life, kind of thing. So they raised us really independent. I moved to Europe in 1993. And I was doing a lot of artistic stuff for Sony Digital. It was really the early days of digital audio discs, that whole period, and moving into the 90s. And, CDs were the big thing. And I was doing design work and building the early websites. And I was kind of a geek and I loved doing that. But since I was in Europe, I moved to the south of France. I started playing gigs in a band and writing songs. And I had 3 kids. I gave birth to 3 little kids who are now adults and grown up. And I started kind of on my entrepreneurial journey then. And I was selling goods that I had imported from overseas. And that was my first kind of small business. And then my husband left me. And like most mothers do, I said, okay, screw this. I'm going to become a rock star. And I started looking for record deals. And I have 3 small kids. It's the stupidest thing anyone can imagine doing, right? Nobody does that. But, I was this poor kind of sad mom of 3 who was like depressed and writing all these songs and, using music as my emotional catharsis. And I got a record deal. And so I moved to the UK and did a lot of recording in Scotland and put out a record and went on tour with Lamar. You might remember Lamar. He was a pretty big singer-songwriter in the UK. I think he was in a boys band called Blue or something. And he broke off and became his own thing, I think, if I remember right. That was his story. And so long of the short, we get up to around 2007 or so. And piracy on the internet was a huge thing. Record labels were suing everybody, every man and their dog. And so we started fighting in the Pirate Bay, and I went to Parliament and, raised hell with them. And they started doing something, and, the Pirate Bay ended up being, put in prison and stuff. And my solution was, look, people are going to be streaming online in the future. I know it's not happening right now, but I went around to all the record labels and said, look, the model's broken. There's no more CDs on the shelves. The markets have crashed. Woolworths isn't selling anything anymore. I was probably one of the last CDs on the shelf in Woolworths, right? And so we started a big marketplace. It was called Cartoons. And by the end of it, we had 14.5 million users, and the recession hit. And the markets crashed and the advertising model wasn't the same as it was. So we struggled for a while. And then I moved into selling nail polish. I just worked out that there's a gap in the market. Women aren't going to salons anymore because of the market crash. Let's sell UV nail gel kits at home. And I didn't have very much money, cost around $100,000 to get all the supplies. So we borrowed money from a couple investors and launched that and sold millions of units all over Europe and the rest of the world. And that kind of sustained. It was a bread and butter sustainable business. We hired, 20 people or so and got a big warehouse and shipped these all over the place and using Groupon and Voucher and all that stuff that happened. I mean, you probably remember, you probably had a million emails from Voucher, here's your deal or, here's your deal. And then I got really tired of shifting nail polish. So I got somebody else to run that. And I started going back to tech and working on projects, and a few startups pulled me in to be their operations person or their CEO, and I was their CMO, and I just filled in the gaps for people who needed interim, consultants. And then I kind of saw this problem in the freelancing and consulting field and started Wedo. And the reason why is because when you look at the market, half the world's workforce will be in the gig economy in a couple of years, and it's growing very fast. And everyone's talking about the great resignation. Well, we were already starting this, 2 years ago when we started developing our banking partnerships and fintech partnerships and the infrastructure for video calls and taking payments so that freelancers could have an opportunity, or any business, in fact, to remove that barrier of entry of the SaaS, the way you pay up front all the time. It's pay. If you're like me, you probably have a million subscriptions to stuff. And, I'm never going to watch that many shows on Netflix. I'm never going to watch my Apple TV forever. It's like, and so I thought, okay, this is a model that could work. Fintech and payments and the banking infrastructure could sustain, giving people enough tools to be able to run their business end to end, take payments, and not have to be charged 20% of each client that they serve. And I'm referring to some of the other freelance platforms and some of the, the places where there's a middleman that takes a massive chunk of cash, And I think what was important to me is to see that creative people had a method that was seamless in order to get paid, serve their clients, grow their communities, and have that social infrastructure so that they could understand the beat on the street. So if you're in an industry and you're siloed, the FOMO of what's my competitor doing, or what are these other people doing? And when people collaborate and understand what their market is doing, they build better products or they create better services. And that's what Wedo does.
And that brings us right up to kind of where we are now. Yeah, exactly. No doubt you've been through one hell of an entrepreneurial journey, from gigging yourself as a musician. That's entrepreneurship at its finest, let's be fair, as a musician. Getting your record deal, moving forward, working with other startups, and then turn the coin on yourself, really. How did you come up with the idea for Wedo?
I'm sure it's a culmination of all the events, the successes and failures of a life, where ideas come from. But I think that there is this magical space that every human being has where ideas come from. And it's, and the Romans and the Greeks used to call it the genius, right? And it's something that came and descended upon you. And sometimes that's what it feels like. It feels like that when you're writing a song. It feels like that when you're getting ready to create an artistic piece. And it feels that way when you're beginning to think about launching your business. And for me, I woke up one morning and my dad had this little saying that if you want to beat the bank, you have to be the bank. And he would say that to us when we were asking him for money. And he'd be like, right, go out and mow the lawn, right? Or go do this for me. And then I might give you a couple bucks, right? And I woke up one morning, and this happens to me a lot. It's like a funnel, when you sleep, you get energized and then all these ideas flow. That's how my mind works. And sometimes when you get out of the way of your mind, the best ideas come. It's when you're it's kind of like people who date, right? They're like, oh man, I can't find the perfect person, the perfect whatever. And then they give up. And lo and behold, the minute they're not looking for it, magic partner shows up, right? The magic woman of your dreams, or the magic man of your dreams, right? And exactly. I think that's how ideas work, So I don't know is the answer. I don't know where the idea came from. I woke up one morning and said, okay, if I want to beat the bank, I have to be the bank. That's it. That's how I can remove a barrier. The business can be profitable and generate revenue, but we don't have to fleece people. We don't have to take chunks of their income and commissions and charge them ridiculous fees. And so I started building it. Got my Adobe XD out and started, iterating and building stuff, and made a prototype, and then showed it to a few people, and they were like, yeah, we're in, we'll join you, and all of a sudden I went from one person to 6 people, and then to 15 people, and then to 25 people in the company, all trying to serve one goal, to help more people help more people. And it's grown that way.
So one thing I'm really interested to know, since COVID-19, we've seen more and more remote working. You touched upon the Great Resignation and kind of the rise of the freelance/gig economy.
Mhm.
How do you see that panning out over the next few to even 5 years?
Yeah, it's a huge movement. First of all, we're getting a lot of statistics on the digital nomad. Now that COVID has stopped, people are dying to get out of their houses. So a lot of people who work online are moving around and experiencing life from different countries and different cities, different places. And that unleashes so much in terms of creativity, that alone, right? When you can work from anywhere you want. And I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that. I also think that a lot more companies have realized that they have happier employees if they let them do a hybrid type work line, right? And they saw, especially in the technical industries, that without the distraction of the office, going on, there's higher productivity and people were really maximizing on their time. At the same time, an employed person was also generating a side hustle at home. They had all this free time that, you couldn't go for a walk for a while, right? You had to have a dog to go for a walk during COVID, they shut everything down. You couldn't go for a shop unless it was really necessary. And so people were using their time in various ways. And I think that has brought out a huge rebirth in entrepreneurship and also the solopreneur and people actually educating themselves and figuring out the things that they really want to do with their life. So as a result, I think we're going to see a lot more fractional employees and hybrid employees. And by fractional, I mean, you might be a CMO for one company, and then you might spend 20 hours a week doing digital design or something else for another company. Or you may be an influencer for part of your time for a company or on behalf of the company, or doing social media or whatever that is, right? Engineering, etc. And businesses will begin to share employees. And the rise of the consultant, being able to hire people from all over the world, opening those gates to the employer of record model, where the world is your oyster. If you want to hire someone in India, in Africa, in Canada, in Spain, wherever they are, we've seen the emergence of those kind of companies, so that you don't need to be local to work for a company internationally anymore. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, and more independence and more innovation. And the world's moving extremely fast.
As a 5-time startup founder, if you could go back and kind of start out as a freelancer right now, how high up the list would you prioritize social media marketing, and what would you do in that position?
I think it's one of the most important factors for a business, that style of marketing. It's the biggest way word of mouth spreads. It's instantaneous. Once something takes off, it takes off. I think I would rank it number one. Well, yeah, number one or number two between PR and social media. But I think the two really go hand in hand now. If you put a piece out, or you do a podcast or you do a TV, it's still being shared on social media. So I'd rank it, number one, definitely.
And what advice would you give to a freelancer starting out right now? What should their first thing they do be?
Find a client and serve them. find a niche you can fill, or offer a product that's of value to someone else. And by that, I mean using your talent, knowledge, or skills to serve someone. That's the first thing. And find a client you can do that for. And whether they pay you or not on that first gig doesn't necessarily matter. Go do the job and get the feedback, get your mojo up, and then let people know what you're doing. And use social media as a leverage, because it's practically free. They cost you your time. You'll learn a lot that way, I think. And I would suggest don't spend a lot of money advertising your services until you've really honed your message.
So one thing I wanted to touch on, as a lot of C-suites across the globe are still very male dominated. But I know when I've been speaking to others that it is changing, and we're starting to see more and more talented females coming through.
Mm-hmm.
But what is it like being a female CEO in a male dominated industry? And what advice would you give to a young aspiring female entrepreneur in your shoes?
Well, I think if you found your own company, you kind of need to lead it for a certain amount of time. And so it's always one step in front of the next step and then the next step, it's a journey. And so I would suggest being highly persistent. Being a female in a male dominated world, especially in technology, isn't easy because you're not always taken seriously. Sometimes they send you to go make the coffee and you're like, what? I'm the one like building this thing. What's going on here? So you just have to be assertive. I happen to have a very strong assertive personality on any Enneagram. I come out always 99% to 100% on the assertive side. And so I don't let other people influence my mindset. That doesn't mean I'm stubborn. I'm not at all stubborn. What it means is that I don't let those external factors of whether someone's male, female, black, white, Asian, whatever they are, influence who I am, because ultimately we're all human. And so although it's been a struggle, it's a historical, it's kind of a legacy struggle for women. The reason why we're not in those top positions is because 40 years ago, women were staying at home and they weren't working. I mean, the women going to work started happening in like the 70s, right? So although we have been emancipated and liberated and everybody burned their bras in the 60s, we still have only had a few generations of women working in the workforce. And then those traditional roles changing over time, and then more and more women studying technology. That movement hasn't really started until recently. So it's very difficult to find people who have specific skill sets in specific industries. It's grown faster in the financial industries. You have more and more quants, more and more, CFOs who are females now. And I expect that will grow. So it's a historical thing. And I think that now the world's opening up more to it. And especially in the investment world, they're recognizing that women, we score really high, against our male counterpoints, even though there are less of us, but we still only receive a very small percentage, around 1.5% to 2% of funds from venture capitalists every year. And it's growing, but it's growing very incrementally. But however, the biggest play in the markets are technology plays. So when you are building a startup and you're in the technology and innovation kind of area, you have a higher propensity to be able to raise that capital. So, it's changing, the world's changing, and it will continue to change.
You touched on a couple of things there, and one of which was obviously the historical model of women staying at home, raising the children. And also you mentioned earlier on that you're a mum of 3.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly didn't fit that mold. You have went out, you've hustled, you've created 5 businesses and still been a mum. How did you balance that time between family life and business life?
Startups are really convenient. You've heard the story about how, PayPal started in their garage, right? And so the majority of the time that you spend in an early stage company is from your home. You don't necessarily have an office until maybe year 2 or 3 after you've raised enough capital to justify having an office. And technology can be run online. You can have teams that are, in certain specific areas who meet regularly, but you don't necessarily have to have an office or have too much of a space to get started. So that's very convenient when you have children. And then part of being a freelancer or a consultant means that you set your own hours. So it makes it easy to go do the school run or to pick them up or to take them to their dancing lessons or their karate or their football, And, I was overseas, so I didn't have family around me. I did hire au pair girls who would come and live with us for a year and learn the language and the country we were living in. But my kids all survived me and my shenanigans. They came to gigs with me. They came on tour with me sometimes. They worked in our factory when we were producing nail polish, and they've learned a lot about entrepreneurship, and I think they enjoyed it. In fact, they have entrepreneurial kind of skill sets themselves, which has proven really good for them in their careers already. So you can work on your own terms. And I think that what's exciting about the internet, because we didn't really have an internet when I had really small kids. We had the birth of the first Googles, the Yahoos, the CompuServes, and email, but that was about it. And I think now women who are working, who have skill sets and have developed themselves while their children are young, are setting a great example for their kids. Because when your kids are gone, you get a lot of free time back when they grow up. So yeah, I think, it's a juggle. Everything's a juggle. For me, I chose to do everything I did with them and be around them as much as possible, rather than being in an office and not seeing them all day long. I didn't want to treat my kids like some people treat their animals, where the dog's cooped up in an apartment or in a house, all day long. And it's like, hi, Mom, when you come home. I wasn't going to do that. Having kids meant investing time and energy into their development as well as my own.
It's an amazing insight, because that's a question as entrepreneurs get asked a lot. And I think it's nice to see that you combined both and prove that it does work. So just to wrap up, there's one question that I love asking my guests. And purely down to this question normally provides some insight people wish they had before they'd set off on their journey. So if you could go back in time to a young Indiana and give her one bit of advice, what would it be?
I think that the most important thing is to set reasonable goals, even though you have a long-term journey, and don't get upset when the journey changes or something shifts in your plans, and be very persistent. Persistent beats resistant all the time. So what I mean by that is don't quit, because that's the way the majority of people fail. If you're persistent and you continue to follow a path regularly, you have a consistency to what you're doing. And this works with just about everything in life. Consistency, if you're a writer, write every day. If you're doing social media, post every day. If you're, coding, code every day. And that you don't have to. I think one of the things probably when I was growing up, or when I was leaving university, there was this kind of idea that you studied something and you need to go do that thing that you studied, and that was going to be what you did for the rest of your life. And that's agonizing. Don't be afraid to learn. And the reason why you go to school is to teach yourself how to learn. It doesn't necessarily mean getting straight A's or having the very best of an education. It means that you are fluid enough to learn new things. And for me, that would be the best advice. And it's kind of what I've done over the years, but I would still reinforce that advice. And I think that's something that my philosophy teacher at school kind of reinforced in me, to be fluid and use your talent and knowledge, and make sure that you are continuously learning throughout life about all things, 360 degrees, about yourself, your human nature, the way you think. The thoughts are very powerful. I think controlling your thoughts and not letting other things enter so that you can be persistent and focused is pretty powerful.
I absolutely love what the saying you just coined there of persistence beats resistance. And I think a lot of people need to hear that. So thank you again for spending some time with me and our listeners. Finally, where can our listeners find you online?
Well, they can find me or follow me. Indiana Gregg is my @ handle on Instagram or Twitter or YouTube or wherever. And then, follow Wedo. It's Wedo_HQ on most social media. And if they want to find out more about the app, download it. It's Wedo, WEDO. And the website is getwedo.today.